A tense family gathering headline. It describes a woman attending her grandmother's 85th birthday party hosted by her dad and sister. Her husband suddenly whispers to her, "Get your bag, we're leaving. Act like nothing's wrong." At first, she thinks he is exaggerating, but once inside the car he locks the doors and warns, "Something's very, very wrong." 10 minutes later, she calls the police. The text is large, urgent, and yellow to highlight the danger. The envelope had no return address. Cream-colored, thick paper, sealed with a golden wax emblem pressed into an unfamiliar crest. Emily almost threw it out with the rest of the week's mail, but the name caught her eye, Margaret Whitmore. Her grandmother. They hadn't spoken in over 5 years. Not since the funeral. Not since Emily had left early without saying goodbye to her father or sister. Not since the silence between them had stopped being circumstantial and become permanent. She opened the envelope at the kitchen counter, holding it with the careful distance one gives to something fragile, or potentially dangerous. James looked up from his laptop, sensing her hesitation. "What is it?" he asked. Emily didn't answer at first. Her eyes scanned the elegant cursive. "You're invited to a celebration in honor of Margaret Whitmore's 85th birthday," she read aloud. "Hosted by Charles Whitmore and Vanessa Whitmore. Saturday, September 21st. Whitmore Family Estate, Woodridge, Connecticut." She blinked. "They're having it at the old place." James raised an eyebrow. "The estate? I thought it was closed up." "It was. Or at least, it should have been. No one's lived there full-time since. I don't even know." He stood and crossed the room to her, peering over her shoulder. "That's the one by the lake, right? The place your dad inherited from your grandfather?" Emily nodded, distracted. "I didn't even know Grandma was still. I mean, she must have moved into a facility by now." James gave her a look, half caution, half curiosity. "You want to go?" She exhaled slowly, placing the invitation on the counter like it might explode. "I don't know." They stood in silence for a moment, the late summer afternoon light spilling through the window, casting golden lines across the floor. James leaned against the fridge. "It might not be the worst idea." Emily gave a short laugh. "Are you kidding? You remember the last time we saw them? Vanessa didn't say a single word to me. My father kept pretending I wasn't even in the room. And Grandma, she just sat there staring out the window. I think she called me Rachel at one point." "Your cousin?" "Yeah. Who died 20 years ago." James softened. "Maybe that's why they're reaching out. She's getting older. Maybe they want to reconnect. Or maybe they just want something." She didn't say what she meant, documents, signatures, guilt, but the words hovered between them anyway. "You don't have to decide right now," James said gently. "But think about it. It might be good for you. For all of you." Emily looked at the invitation again. The gold crest seemed to gleam more now, like it was waiting. That night, she lay awake beside James, staring at the ceiling. The name, Margaret, kept echoing in her head. The same voice from childhood, telling her to sit up straight, to speak properly, to not embarrass the family. The woman who had once brushed her hair for hours, humming old war songs. Who had slapped her father once, hard, across the mouth, when he was too drunk to speak. Who had told Emily, "Don't ever let them scare you into silence." What had changed? The next morning, she emailed the RSVP. To attending. She told James over coffee. He didn't look surprised. "You'll feel better once you see her. I don't even know if she'll recognize me. She'll know you." He kissed her forehead, then turned back to his phone, already moving on to his morning tasks. But Emily stayed there, holding her mug with both hands, watching the steam curl upward. 3 days later, a package arrived, another cream-colored envelope, this time thicker. Inside was a map to the estate, a printed schedule for the party, and a note in Vanessa's unmistakable handwriting. "So glad you're coming. Grandma's been asking about you. No punctuation. No warmth. Emily tucked the note away in a drawer. She didn't pack until the night before. James took care of most of it, loading the car with clothes, snacks, and a cooler. The drive to Connecticut would take nearly 5 hours. She called out of work. Said it was a family emergency. That wasn't a lie, she figured, just a little premature. They left just after 7 o'clock in the morning. The interstate was quiet, the trees starting to blush into early autumn. James kept the music low. Emily stared out the window most of the way. "Do you think it'll be awkward?" she asked once, somewhere outside Hartford. James glanced at her. "Yes. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. What if it's worse than awkward?" He smiled faintly. "Then we leave. Simple as that." She nodded, but something about it didn't feel simple at all. They arrived in Woodridge just before noon. The road leading to the estate was narrower than she remembered, or maybe the trees had grown thicker. She saw the lake first, still and glassy, reflecting the heavy gray sky. Then the house came into view, perched on a slight hill, tall and austere, its white paint beginning to peel in places. Dozens of cars were already parked along the gravel path. Music floated out from the back terrace. Balloons, blue and gold, dotted the porch railings. Someone was laughing. James parked and looked at her. "You ready?" Emily hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. They stepped out of the car. Something in her chest tightened as they approached the house. A smell hit her, roses and old wood. She hadn't been here in over a decade. The windows looked darker than they should have, even in daylight. At the door, Vanessa appeared. She wore navy blue, her hair pulled into a tight bun. Her smile was all teeth and tension. "Emily," she said. "You came." Emily forced a smile. "Wouldn't miss it." James extended a hand. "Good to see you again, Vanessa." Vanessa shook it without breaking eye contact with Emily. "Come on in," she said. "Grandma's been waiting." Emily stepped inside. The air felt colder than it should have. And somewhere, deep in her gut, a voice whispered, "Something is wrong." The hallway smelled of polish and dust. Emily's heels echoed on the hardwood floor as they stepped deeper into the house. Everything looked cleaner than she remembered, but not new, more like it had been dressed up quickly, hastily made presentable. Paintings that used to hang at odd angles were now perfectly aligned. The runner rug had been replaced, and the family portraits along the stairwell glowed under dim, strategically placed lighting. Voices murmured in a nearby room, and the gentle clinking of glasses drifted from beyond a cracked door. Vanessa turned to them, motioning toward the back of the house. "Everyone's gathering in the sunroom. We thought it would be more comfortable than the formal dining room." Emily nodded. James said nothing, keeping his eyes forward. They passed through the familiar archway and entered the sunroom, now arranged with clusters of chairs and round tables draped in white linen. Gold ribbons hung from the ceiling beams, and a classical quartet played softly in the corner. Around 20 guests mingled in small groups, some standing stiffly, others seated and chatting with an almost forced energy. The moment Emily entered, a few heads turned. Conversations dipped for a beat. Then, as if on cue, everyone resumed their talking, but quieter, like someone had turned the volume down slightly. A man near the window offered a polite smile. An older woman lifted her glass, then looked away. James placed a hand on the small of Emily's back. "Let's say hello and find a place to sit." She spotted her father near the fireplace. Charles Whitmore stood with a whiskey glass in hand, gesturing with his free arm as he spoke to a couple in designer coats. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore his usual navy blazer with the Whitmore crest stitched on the breast pocket. His voice carried farther than necessary, confident, theatrical, the kind of voice that expected applause after every anecdote. He glanced up and saw her. For a second, his expression was blank. Then, a broad smile stretched across his face. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said, stepping toward them. Emily kept her tone measured. "Hello, Dad." He kissed her cheek quickly, then turned to James with a nod. "Glad you made it, son." James returned the nod. "Thanks for having us." Charles gestured around the room. "It's all for her. Margaret's having a good day, thank God. Sharp as a tack earlier this morning. She's resting a bit now, but I'll bring you to her when she wakes up." "She's not up yet?" Emily asked. "She was," he said quickly. "But she's 85. Needs her rest. Don't worry, you'll get your moment." He clapped his hands once, loudly. "Now, mingle. There's food in the conservatory, and we'll be doing toasts in an hour." He disappeared back into the crowd, as effortlessly as he had emerged from it. Emily took a breath, her jaw tightening. James leaned closer. "Let's keep moving." They walked toward the conservatory, passing a set of family friends Emily barely remembered. She gave polite nods, keeping her face neutral, as if walking through a gallery of ghosts. The conservatory had been converted into a buffet space. Trays of hors d'oeuvres lined the marble counters, untouched wine glasses clustered on silver trays. Emily poured herself a glass of water. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted it. "I feel like I just walked into a wake," she muttered. James scanned the room. "Too many people watching us. None of them really talking." She followed his gaze. At a corner table, a cousin she hadn't seen in years gave her a brief, guarded look before turning away. Nearby, two older women whispered over their drinks, and one of them darted a glance toward Emily. "I don't like this," she said under her breath. "Neither do I," James replied. "But let's stay calm. Maybe it's just awkward family energy." They sat near the back of the room, away from the main gathering. A server came by offering champagne, which James declined. Emily took one, more out of reflex than desire. Vanessa reappeared, gliding through the tables like she owned the place. She stopped by briefly, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Grandma should be up in about 30 minutes. I'll come get you when she is." Emily looked up at her sister, studying her face. Vanessa's expression was warm but distant, her smile too perfectly shaped. "Thanks," Emily said. Vanessa turned and walked off without another word. The tension in the room didn't ease. If anything, it thickened. Every gesture felt rehearsed. Laughter came at strange intervals, clipped and awkward. Emily noticed that nobody had their phones out, not even the teenagers. She leaned toward James again. "Where are all the phones?" He looked around, then frowned. "Good question. I haven't seen anyone with one. Not even taking pictures. Maybe it's a no-phone party." Emily gave him a look. "Okay, yeah, that's weird," James admitted. Minutes passed. They picked at their food but barely ate. The party seemed frozen in place, like everyone was waiting for a cue. Then, something shifted. A door creaked open down the hall. A short woman with snow-white hair entered, leaning heavily on a cane. "Margaret." The room quieted instantly, like a switch had been flipped. Emily stood automatically, setting down her glass. James followed. Her grandmother moved slowly but with purpose. She wore a cream-colored dress with a matching shawl draped over her shoulders. Her face was thinner than Emily remembered, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, were unmistakably the same. Vanessa walked beside her, smiling brightly, one hand supporting Margaret's arm. As they approached, Margaret stopped walking. Her eyes locked on Emily. "Emily," she said clearly. The name rang through the silence. Emily stepped forward. "Hi, Grandma." Margaret's lips twitched. "You look tired." Emily managed a smile. "Long drive." "Still married?" the old woman asked, narrowing her eyes toward James. "Yes, ma'am," James answered with a calm nod. Margaret's gaze lingered on him a second longer than necessary. Then she continued past them with Vanessa, murmuring, "Let's sit by the window. That view's all I've got left." As the rest of the room resumed its low chatter, Emily stood frozen. James touched her elbow. "She remembered you." "Barely." She remembered. They returned to their table. Across the room, Charles raised his glass and called for silence. "Let's begin the toasts." The next half-hour dragged with speeches, most of them bland or overly sentimental. Emily listened, but her focus drifted. Something about Margaret's demeanor unsettled her, not the confusion she had expected, but a sharpness, a deliberate calculation in her tone. It was as if the old woman was holding something back. Then, near the end of Charles's toast, a commotion near the kitchen caught her attention. Two men stepped out briefly from behind a swinging door, both dressed in black. Not catering staff, no aprons, no trays. One of them had an earpiece. The other held something in his hand that looked like a small radio. Emily turned to James. "You saw that?" she whispered. "I did." Before she could ask more, Vanessa stood again. "If everyone would please join us in the main sitting room, we'll begin the video tribute." Emily didn't remember any mention of a video. People began filing out of the sunroom. James stayed seated. "Something's off," he said. Emily nodded slowly. And though no one else seemed alarmed, a cold feeling wrapped itself around her spine. She stood up. "Let's go watch their little tribute," she said quietly. "Then we're leaving." James looked at her, his jaw tight. "I'll follow your lead." They stepped into the hall, where the shadows felt thicker now, the light somehow dimmer. And neither of them noticed that every door they passed was now closed, and locked. The sitting room was darker than the rest of the house. Heavy curtains had been drawn closed, and someone had placed rows of chairs theater-style in front of a large television mounted above the fireplace. A faint hum filled the space, perhaps from the projector or hidden speakers. Guests filed in without speaking, the air somehow more charged than before. Emily and James found seats in the second-to-last row. As they settled in, Emily noticed the two men in black again. They stood by the far wall, one near the entrance and the other close to the hallway. They weren't security guards, at least not in any official sense, no badges, no clear insignia, but they radiated authority nonetheless. She looked around, trying to see if anyone else noticed them. But everyone else seemed compliant. Subdued. A few exchanged soft words, but most simply sat with hands folded, eyes forward, waiting. Then the door shut. Not slammed, just a quiet, final click. The kind that's meant to go unnoticed. The lights dimmed further. A soft piano melody began to play from overhead speakers. On the screen, an old photograph appeared, a black and white image of a young Margaret, maybe no more than 20 years old, standing beside her husband in front of the estate's lake. Emily stared at it. She had never seen that photo before. The slideshow progressed. More images followed, birthday parties from the 60s, family holidays in the snow, barbecues on the estate lawn. It was all tastefully done, but there was something oddly curated about it, too pristine, too sanitized. Every photo showed smiling faces, ideal lighting, harmony. As if someone had filtered out the actual life. James leaned toward her. "This wasn't in the schedule." "I know," she whispered back. Midway through, Charles appeared in a video clip. He stood in the library, speaking directly into the camera. "My mother has been the backbone of this family. She's weathered storms we couldn't imagine. We're here today to celebrate her strength, and to honor the legacy she built with her own hands." He paused, then smiled. "But even legacies need transition." The video cut abruptly. Now on screen, a shaky, handheld video. Vanessa's voice was heard off-camera, guiding Margaret into a chair. The room looked like the sunroom from earlier, but the lighting was different. More intimate. Margaret looked tired, but her eyes were open, blinking slowly as Vanessa spoke. "Just look at me, Grandma. That's good. Okay, now, tell us again." What did you decide? Margaret didn't respond. Grandma? I didn't decide, the old woman murmured. But we talked about it. No. Vanessa's voice grew tighter. You said you'd sign. Margaret closed her eyes. The screen went black again. Several guests shifted in their seats. Whispers rose briefly, then died out. James's body had gone still beside Emily. She could feel the tension in him, like a spring wound too tight. The lights returned. Not all the way, just enough for people to start moving again. No one clapped. Vanessa stepped to the front, hands clasped, expression unreadable. Thank you all. That was a very personal moment to share, and we appreciate your discretion. She looked toward Emily, though not directly at her. Some things are difficult, but necessary. Charles joined her at the front of the room. We'll be serving dessert in the main dining room. Please, make yourselves comfortable. People began rising from their chairs, but no one spoke above a whisper. Emily stayed seated. That wasn't a tribute, she said under her breath. No, James agreed. It was a warning. They stood, slowly. On the far side of the room, the man with the earpiece whispered something into his sleeve and disappeared down the hall. I want to find the guest bathroom, James said. Emily blinked. Now? Just give me 2 minutes. She nodded. He slipped away into the hallway while she followed the slow procession of guests toward the dining room. As she passed the grand staircase, a figure caught her eye, her Aunt Marianne, a short woman in her 60s with clouded eyes and a stiff gait. Emily hadn't spoken to her in years. But now the older woman stepped toward her, lips pressed into a tight line. You shouldn't be here, Marianne said in a low voice. Emily froze. Excuse me? They're using her. She doesn't know what's happening. What are you talking about? Marianne's eyes darted left, then right. They've been moving things. Taking things from her room. She's locked in most nights. This isn't about her birthday. Emily grabbed her arm gently. Tell me what's going on. But Marianne flinched. I've said too much. And just like that, she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Emily stood still for a moment, heart pounding. A voice called her name. It was James. He was walking briskly toward her from the opposite side of the hallway, eyes wide. We need to go. Now. What did you see? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he grabbed her hand and pulled her into the vestibule near the coat room. Only once they were out of sight did he speak. Down the hall, near the pantry. There's a side door, it's blocked from the outside. Not locked. Blocked. Like they don't want anyone using it. Emily's mouth went dry. Maybe it's just storage. There's more. The kitchen's completely closed off. No staff. No cooks. Just 2 men standing there. Armed. Armed? One of them had a pistol at his waist. Concealed, but not well. She took a step back. Emily, this isn't just a weird party. Something's happening. I think they're keeping your grandmother here against her will. She struggled to process it. We can't just leave. Not without. He interrupted. We need proof. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. They didn't take it from me. Yet. But there's no signal. No bars, no Wi-Fi. He opened the camera. I managed to record the hallway. And that radio. One of the men used it to call someone when he saw me. Footsteps approached. James slipped the phone back into his coat pocket just as Vanessa rounded the corner. There you are, she said smoothly. Everyone's waiting for cake. James smiled thinly. We were just looking for the restroom. Vanessa tilted her head. You passed it. Must have missed the sign. She studied them for a beat too long. Well, let's not keep everyone waiting. Back in the dining room, the mood had shifted again. Plates of cake were being served. Margaret sat at the head of the table, a birthday crown now perched awkwardly on her head. She didn't appear to notice. Charles raised his glass once more. "To family," he said. "To legacy," Vanessa added. The guests murmured their agreement. Emily didn't eat. James barely touched his fork. Across the table, Margaret suddenly looked up and met Emily's eyes. Her lips moved silently. Emily leaned forward, trying to read them. Then, barely audible over the clinking silverware, she heard the whisper. "Help me." Emily's blood turned to ice. She stood. Vanessa looked at her sharply. "Everything all right?" James rose beside her. "Yeah," Emily said, her voice steady. "We're just stepping out for some air." Charles opened his mouth, but Vanessa stopped him with a glance. They walked out, slowly. Once in the hallway, James whispered, "We're leaving." Emily didn't argue this time. Whatever had started here wasn't just a family dispute. It was something deeper. Something dangerous. And they were now in the middle of it. James leaned in. "Get your bag," he said quietly. "We're leaving. Act like nothing's wrong." James's voice had never sounded like that before, not rushed, not even afraid, but charged with a razor-sharp clarity that made Emily's skin prickle. She felt her limbs obey without protest, her instincts surrendering to something deeper than thought. She nodded once, barely, and turned toward the guest room where she'd left her purse and jacket. The hall was still, muffled, like the house itself was holding its breath. Emily moved carefully, conscious of every sound her heels made on the hardwood floors. James stayed beside her, his hand hovering protectively near her back but never touching. They didn't speak. The guest wing was quieter than the main areas. She reached the door to their room and stepped inside. Everything looked exactly as she had left it, down to the folded scarf on the dresser and the untouched water bottle beside the bed. She picked up her bag and coat, trying not to fumble. Her fingers felt clumsy, as if her body was resisting her brain. "Are we walking out the front?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "No. Too many eyes. Back hallway. Pantry." She stared at him. "The blocked door?" He nodded. "I can move it. We just need a clean moment." Emily's eyes darted toward the small window near the ceiling. No sound came from the corridor yet, but she could feel time moving against them. She slung the bag over her shoulder. "Let's go." They stepped back into the hall, and for one brief moment, it looked clear. But halfway down the corridor, just before the turn toward the back kitchen, a voice called out behind them. "Going somewhere?" It was Charles. He stood near the base of the main staircase, drink in hand, his expression caught between cordiality and warning. James kept walking, and Emily forced herself to do the same. "Just getting some air," James said without slowing. Charles followed them with his gaze, but didn't answer. Emily didn't dare turn to look at him again. They rounded the corner. The kitchen came into view. The two men in black weren't at their previous posts, but Emily had no time to question why. James led her quickly past the cold countertops and industrial-grade appliances until they reached the pantry door. He stopped, glanced around once, then opened it. Inside, the narrow space was stacked with supplies, extra linens, boxes of wine, unopened crates of bottled water. Toward the back, a wooden shelf stood against what looked like a small, reinforced door. No lock, just a metal bar leaned diagonally to brace it. James moved it carefully, balancing it so it wouldn't fall and make a sound. "You sure about this?" she whispered. "No. But I'm more sure we can't stay." The door creaked softly as he pushed it open. It led into a short passageway between the main house and an old detached greenhouse, one Emily barely remembered from childhood. The air was colder here, the stone floor damp from years of disuse. Weeds pushed up through cracks. Cobwebs hung thick in the corners. They stepped through. James closed the pantry door behind them and set the wooden bar gently back in place from the other side. Emily adjusted her coat. "Where does this lead?" "Out to the side lawn. If we move fast, we can hit the treeline in 5 minutes. From there, we follow the road until I get signal." She nodded. "What if someone sees us?" "Then we don't stop." They started moving, brisk but careful. The greenhouse was mostly empty now, just metal frames and cracked glass. Once past it, a side gate came into view, chained, but loosely. James reached into his coat, produced a multi-tool, and began working the latch. Emily kept watch behind them. That was when she heard it. A shuffle. Footsteps on stone. Not fast. Deliberate. "James. I hear it." The chain dropped with a soft clink. They stepped through, and the lawn opened before them, untamed, the grass high, the edge of the woods only a few hundred yards away. James grabbed her hand this time. "Go." They ran. The air tore past her ears. Emily's breath came sharp and ragged. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she didn't stop. Behind them, a voice shouted, then another. Lights flared on from the side porch. "Stop! Emily!" Charles's voice again, harsh and closer than it should have been. They reached the edge of the trees and ducked under the lowest branches. Thorns scratched her arms, and twigs snapped underfoot. James led them through the dense underbrush, not speaking, only glancing back once to make sure she was still behind him. Finally, after what felt like hours but had only been minutes, they emerged onto a small gravel road winding through the woods. James pulled out his phone again. "No bars. Damn it. We need help." "I know. We keep going until we find someone or get signal." They moved down the road, slower now, checking behind them every few steps. The voices had stopped. No headlights. No one following, yet. After another 5 minutes, James stopped cold. There. In the distance, headlights. A car. Emily froze. "Do we wave it down?" "Wait. Let me see who it is." The vehicle approached slowly. Then, as it neared, it slowed even more. Too slowly. Emily felt it before she understood it. "It's them," she said quietly. James grabbed her arm. "Into the ditch. Now." They slid down the embankment and crouched low behind the cover of thick shrubs. The car rolled past, a black SUV, windows tinted. One of the same vehicles they'd seen in the estate's driveway. Inside, they could see the faint glow of a radio lit up on the dash. Emily held her breath as the vehicle crawled forward, then accelerated slightly and continued on. They stayed still. Only when the red taillights disappeared into the distance did James speak. That wasn't just security. No. He stood, offered his hand, pulled her up. They kept moving. By the time they reached a clearing, James's phone buzzed. "Signal," he said. "Weak, but it's there." He dialed quickly, turned his back, whispered into the phone. Emily scanned the area. A dirt service road veered off to the right, lined with tire tracks. James came back to her. "Local authorities." I gave them the address, told them there's an elderly woman being held without full mental capacity and coerced into signing legal documents. I also mentioned possible armed presence on the property. Did they believe you? They're sending a car to meet us on the main road. 10 minutes. Emily wiped sweat and dirt from her brow. "I'm scared," she said. It surprised her how flat the words came out. James took her hand. "Good. That means you're still paying attention." They stood there, waiting, wind rustling through the trees. Far in the distance, the sound of a siren broke the silence, faint but real. James gave a short nod. "Help's coming." But behind them, back through the trees, the house still stood like a wound that hadn't closed. And inside, Margaret waited. The first glimpse of the patrol car felt almost surreal, red and blue lights flashing through the misty curtain of trees like beacons in a nightmare. Emily didn't move at first, afraid it would vanish like a mirage. James squeezed her hand, then raised his arms slowly, making them visible without shouting. The car pulled onto the dirt shoulder, its engine quieting to a low hum. Two officers stepped out, one older, lean with gray at his temples, the other younger, with sharp eyes and a hand that hovered near his holster. "Name?" the older one asked. "James Carter," James said, voice calm but direct. "This is my wife, Emily Carter. We were guests at the Whitmore estate. We believe an elderly woman is being held there under duress. There are at least 2 men with weapons, and the guests had no access to phones or open exits." The officer's expression didn't change, but he glanced at his partner, then back to them. "You called in a coercion report?" "Yes." "Margaret Whitmore. 85 years old." She appeared confused, maybe sedated. They were trying to get her to sign legal documents during her birthday celebration. "And who's they?" "Charles Whitmore. Her son. And Vanessa Whitmore, her granddaughter." Emily stepped forward. "Please," she said. She asked for help. She looked right at me and whispered it. "I know what I saw. I know what I heard." The older officer nodded slowly. "All right. Get in the back of the vehicle. We'll head to the main road, call for backup once we're clear of the trees." They climbed into the back seat. The younger officer kept his eyes on the forest edge as the vehicle turned onto the narrow gravel road and started back toward the paved route. Emily felt some of the tightness in her chest ease, but it wasn't relief. Not yet. They were out, but they hadn't done anything, not really. Margaret was still in that house, likely drugged or threatened or both. James leaned close. "When we get to town, we're not going home." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're going to try to bury this. If Charles and Vanessa sense an investigation, they'll move fast. We need to stay close, stay involved." "You think the police won't do anything?" "I think people like Charles Whitmore know how to make things disappear." The road widened and curved. Soon, the familiar sign for Woodridge appeared, followed by the first glimpses of civilization, gas stations, a diner, the quiet main street of a wealthy Connecticut town where everything always looked polished but hollow. The patrol car pulled into the small police station. As they exited, the officers escorted them inside, where another uniformed man stood behind a desk, clipboard ready. Names were taken. A brief statement was recorded. But Emily saw it happening again, the slow drain of urgency, the way details were written down without emotion, the way the officer nodded like he'd heard it all before. James, sensing it too, grew sharper with his words. "You don't understand," he said. "This isn't just elder abuse. It's fraud. Maybe worse. There were armed men on private property with no legal security licenses, no visible ID. Phones were collected from guests. It was all designed to keep the outside world out." "And you say you have video?" "Yes," James said. "But it needs to be recovered. My phone dropped during the run through the woods. I think it fell when I pulled Emily over the embankment near the old greenhouse." The desk officer, who had barely looked up, finally gave a tight nod. "We'll log the location. If the property owner allows access, we'll have someone retrieve it." Emily opened her mouth, stunned. "Allows? It's private land, ma'am. We can't enter without a warrant or explicit permission." James stepped forward. "What if the person being held is incapacitated? Do you need her signature to investigate the abuse?" The officer didn't answer. Instead, he handed them a form. "You're free to stay at the motel across the street. We'll keep your contact info and follow up if anything develops." Emily took the paper, fingers trembling slightly. "Develops," she repeated. "You want it to develop? So it's easier for you to act?" The officer looked away. James put a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go," he said quietly. They crossed the street in silence, the motel's flickering sign casting strange shadows across the pavement. Inside, the clerk barely acknowledged them, just handed over a key and pointed toward a room on the far end of the lot. The room was small, plain, and smelled faintly of disinfectant. But it had a working lock, a bed, and a sense of separation from the estate that felt critical. Emily sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the floor. She was trying to speak, she said softly. "Back in the dining room. You saw it, right?" James nodded. "I heard it too. She's not going to make it through this if we leave her there." "We're not leaving her." James sat beside her and pulled out a small, dark object from his pocket. Emily frowned. "Wait, your phone?" "I dropped mine," he said. "This is someone else's." She stared at him. "You took it?" "Swapped it, just before we escaped." One of the men by the kitchen left his phone unattended for a second while they were dealing with something by the back door. "I got lucky." Emily reached for it. "Can we open it?" James shook his head. "It's locked. But if it syncs with anything or if there are texts, call logs, GPS data, we might have something." He powered it off and slipped it into the lining of his coat. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go to New Haven. There's a friend of mine, Derek, used to work with a data recovery team. He can help us access whatever's inside." Emily nodded slowly. "And after that?" "We push. Pressure the police. Release the information to someone bigger if we have to. Media. Legal aid. But we don't let this fall silent." That night, Emily didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the neon motel sign outside, the distant howl of wind, the occasional passing car. Her mind replayed it all, the dead stare in Margaret's eyes, the forced smile on Vanessa's face, the image of that radio in the man's hand, the way the door had clicked shut in the sitting room. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, she rose quietly and crossed the room to her bag. She pulled out the small letter that had come with the invitation, the one in Vanessa's handwriting. "So glad you're coming. Grandma's been asking about you." She turned it over, ran her fingers along the paper, something nagging at her. Then she held it up to the lamp. Under the right light, barely visible, a faint impression of other words appeared behind the printed text, something that had been pressed through from the sheet above it. She leaned closer, adjusting the angle, holding her breath. It read, "Keep her quiet until Tuesday. That's when the documents go through." Emily stared. Then she carefully folded the letter again and slid it into her coat pocket. She turned to look at James. "Tuesday," she said quietly. He opened his eyes. "We have 2 days." The next morning carried a grave stillness. Light filtered through the motel blinds in narrow bands, illuminating dust motes that floated in the silent air. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, fingers pressing into the fabric as if searching for a lifeline. The letter slipped from her lap to the floor. She reached down and picked it up, fingertips brushing the dim ink. "Keep her quiet until Tuesday. That's when the documents go through." A chill worked its way through her. James sat across from her on a low chair, phone in hand but silent, as though summoning courage. Their silence stretched, heavy and unrelenting. Finally, Emily spoke. "We need a plan that doesn't rely on the police." Her voice was raw with urgency. "We might have hours, not days." She stood abruptly, then paced toward the window. "If Charles and Vanessa go through with that document signing on Tuesday, they're committing fraud or elder coercion, both criminal. We have to stop it." James nodded, gaze steady. "I called Derek last night. He's en route with a data specialist. If we can get Charles's phone, or the one I grabbed, analyze it, we can expose their plans. But first, we need safe footing." Emily's shoulders tensed. "What if they come after us? We stay one step ahead." He rose and moved to the small kitchenette, making bitter motel coffee. "I found a lawyer from a legal aid network in New Haven. He's willing to consult pro bono if we can make a good case." We need hard evidence and it needs to look sincere. He glanced toward Emily. Your grandmother's request was real. Emily's breath hitched. We can't fail her. They left the room cautiously, stepping into the narrow corridor as though it might betray them. At the front desk, Emily asked if they'd received any messages. The clerk shook his head. Their rented sedan waited outside, engine still warm. Emily climbed in the passenger seat, hand pressed to her chest. The letter rested in her coat pocket, its message a percussive reminder. James started the engine, and they slipped quietly onto the road, toward New Haven. New Haven arrived under a silent sky, streets unusually empty for a Monday morning. The turning leaves shivered in crisp air, the city's predictable calm laced with hidden threats. At a discreet cafe, they met Derek and his associate, Marisol, the data specialist. Inside, the window light softened the tension. Marisol's careful fingers unpacked a laptop and data cables. What do you have? She asked. James produced the phone, handing it to Marisol. She examined it with clinical detachment, eyes narrowing under soft light. Derek watched, impatient, precise. Encrypted, Marisol said after a long moment. But we can extract call logs, text histories, GPS breadcrumb trails. It might take hours. James nodded. We'll wait. Emily stared out the window at the few passers-by, a courier balancing packages, a cyclist pedaling past, oblivious. She clenched her hands, thinking of her grandmother trapped in that house, possibly confused, possibly afraid. The image burned behind her eyelids. Time stretched and then contracted. Each moment felt like a heartbeat. They waited. Silent sips of coffee marked the passing of time. At one point, Emily stood and left the cafe to pace on the empty sidewalk. The world didn't stop. A newspaper stand, fresh editions gleaming, headlines about market fluctuations and celebrity divorces. Nothing here mattered. She scanned for someone, anything, that could help, journalists, activists, curious onlookers. But the world remained mundanely unaware of the storm brewing beneath polished headlines. Inside, Marisol leaned back, exhausted but triumphant. I have data. Emily froze mid-breath as Derek turned to her, expression sober. They had multiple calls to a law firm last week. GPS puts the phone in the sunroom during the party. Messages indicate manipulation of documents and instructions, like how to address Margaret when she's confused. He pulled Emily's letter from his coat pocket, scanned it. His lips pressed thin. This is admission. Emily's heart pounded. The letter, Tuesday's timeline, was the smoking gun. Derek shut his laptop. We need to move now. Marisol gathered data drives. James stared at the drives like they were lifelines. Emerging from the cafe, they moved fast, slipping into the car. As they left New Haven, snow clouds gathered overhead. Emily imagined them as omens. Back in Woodridge, inside that sprawling house, Margaret sat uneasily in the sunroom. The golden afternoon sunlight was muted through drawn curtains. Vanessa hovered nearby, smile still practiced, but her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a portrait frame. Charles stood in the foyer, watching, an impatient conductor anticipating the crescendo. Neither noticed when the front door clicked faintly closed behind them. Outside, the data team drove in silence. Rain began to fall in taut sheets, slapping the windshield. The roads curved and glistened, but ahead, blue and red lights pulsed. Police again, summoned by anonymous tip officers tipped off by Derek earlier. The estate loomed through the rain, more ominous than memory. Emily swallowed hard. This is it. Rain plastered her hair, her coat soaked through as they disembarked. The police formed a half-circle at the house edge, officers with notebooks, one brandishing a search warrant signed within the hour. They approached the front porch in silhouettes. Each creaking floorboard sounded accusatory. Inside, Vanessa's phone buzzed. She answered, color drained from her face as the voice on the other end, an investigator, began. Margaret turned, confused. Charles looked for paper currency to pay off the trouble. Emily and James appeared in the doorway, soaked and resolute. Margaret's eyes found Emily's. No confusion this time, just recognition, relief, and something fierce. Emily knelt beside her. "We're here." Margaret opened her mouth, but nothing came at first. Then, firmly, "Thank you." Outside, the thunder rolled. And for the first time in days, Emily felt a pulse of hope, fragile but real. The house did not collapse under the weight of flashing lights. It adjusted. Lawyers materialized the way storms do over warm water, sudden, dense, inevitable. An associate appeared on the porch in a rain-slick coat, breathless, clutching a folder from a downtown firm Emily did not recognize. The officer with the warrant stepped aside to take a call. A supervisor's voice crackled through, careful and noncommittal. Scope was questioned, language parsed, the kind of tug that pulls a knot tighter instead of loosening it. In the shifting current, Emily found a sliver of stillness at Margaret's side. Up close, her grandmother's skin looked thin as pressed petals. Her gaze, however, was lucid and unwavering. Emily bent low, close enough to feel the old woman's breath warm against her ear. "Lake Deed," Margaret whispered, each syllable threaded with effort. "Box. Window seat." Emily did not blink. "Which room?" "Music," came the answer, almost soundless. "North wall." A hand touched Emily's shoulder. "Vanessa." "Private conversations can wait," she said, voice lined with pleasant poison. "Mother needs rest." The officers, constrained to a welfare check until a judge revisited the warrant language, retreated with a promise to return soon. Emily let her hand brush Margaret's, just once, a seal more binding than ink. Then she followed James back into the rain. They did not speak until the estate disappeared in the rearview. The wipers combed the windshield, the town's colonial roofs hunched against the weather. When James finally looked over, Emily was already writing on the back of an old receipt, sketching a rectangle, marking a window with a small X, labeling it in tiny letters, "Music room, north wall, window seat." "We go back," she said. "Before Tuesday." James nodded without argument. Derek's office in New Haven was a narrow, second-story space above a cobbler whose sign had lost a letter. Marisol had colonized the biggest table with laptops, drives, adapters, a coil of cables like a sleeping serpent. The confiscated phone lay belly-up beside a thumb drive. "We dug deeper," she said, not bothering with greetings. "No unlock, but the metadata is generous. Timestamps, cell handoffs, tower sectors, even a few thumbnail previews cached by a messaging app before encryption. Enough to map behavior. Enough to show intent." She turned the screen. A digital breadcrumb trail spiraled across a satellite map of the estate, clusters around the kitchen and sunroom, dense activity along the back corridor, a staccato of pings descending to the lower level at intervals that looked like patrol. "These are late-night movements," Marisol said. "Not staff bring out the trash loops. Repeated routes. Same device, same hours." Derek slid a printed sheet across to Emily. "Outgoing calls to Dalrymple and Howe, a boutique firm specializing in asset transition. Multiple short calls over the last 10 days, then one long call this morning. And a contact saved only as Mason with a calendar note for Tuesday, early afternoon. There is also a draft text that was never sent, documents ready. Need her signature and witness." Emily tapped the map, following the line toward the lake. She said Lake Deed. Her finger hovered over a pale blue pocket curving into the property's edge. "South Cove. My grandfather talked about a tidal complication there when I was a kid. He called it the Stubborn Corner. There was some special designation, conservation, maybe, he was proud of, because other developers were circling." She looked up. "If Charles transfers control now, they get to undo whatever protections he put in place. That cove is worth more than I can imagine." James shifted a legal pad closer. "If they need a signature that looks uncontested, they will bring a notary and witnesses who will swear capacity. The law firm will file electronically within the hour to beat any objection. We need to cut in line before they file. Which means court, Derek said. And noise. Marisol reached for another folder. Also this. I pulled the device's Bluetooth history. 2 unfamiliar IDs paired in the last week. One of them looks like a scrambler or signal jammer, cheap, handheld, the kind contractors buy off questionable marketplaces. It explains the dead phones. They turned the house into a quiet zone. The room absorbed the weight of that. In the corridor below, the cobbler's hammer found a rhythm. Emily took a breath that felt like a promise. We need an elder law attorney who will move now. Derek's phone was already to his ear. Nora Patel, he said, covering the speaker. She walks fast and files faster. If she says no, I have 2 more names. But she won't say no. Nora did not say no. She listened, asked 3 precise questions, and said, I will seek a temporary restraining order to prevent any transfer of title or powers pending an emergency capacity evaluation. I want exhibits, the letter with the imprint, the metadata log, a sworn affidavit outlining what you observed. I also want the names of any caregivers who can attest to recent changes in medication or access. Emily thought of a soft-voiced woman with a braid and a gentle laugh, there in a single blurred memory beside a vase of peonies. Lila, she said aloud. A caregiver. She disappeared a few months ago. Vanessa had waved it off then as caregiver turnover, the way people dismiss lightning as weather. Emily found the number in an old chain of emails and pressed call. Lila answered on the second ring, suspicion damped by curiosity. Emily introduced herself without apology, tension braided into each word. I'm worried about my grandmother, she said. I think she's being coerced into signing away control. There was a long exhale across the line. I should not be talking to you, Lila said quietly. They made me sign a non-disclosure that might as well be a fence. But I do not like fences. Something warm, rueful. Things changed after New Year. Your sister restricted visitors, installed cameras in the hall, insisted on handling medication herself. She moved pill time earlier, added a new bottle with no label I ever saw in the chart. I asked questions. 2 weeks later I was no longer a good fit. That is how she said it. Do you have anything? Notes? Dates? Emily asked. Anything to anchor a statement. I have a recording, Lila said, surprising herself. A baby monitor accidentally left recording in the sitting room. I did not mean to keep it, but when they fired me, I kept everything. I have audio of a man telling your grandmother to sign a paper. He says it like a joke, but it is not a joke. He says, just your little name right there, sweetheart, and everyone gets to relax. She says, no, he laughs. He says, okay, we can try again later when you are in a better mood. The voice is not your father. Can you send it to our attorney? Emily asked. Today? Yes, Lila said. Send me an email. I will reply with the file. Nora's return call came less than 1 hour later, her voice bright with speed. I have a judge willing to read an emergency petition by late afternoon, she said. I can ask for an order barring the execution or recording of any instruments altering ownership or management of the estate, including the lake parcel, until a capacity evaluation is conducted by a neutral physician. We will also ask for limited access to retrieve originals that predate any alleged alteration. You mentioned a box? Window seat in the music room, Emily said. North wall. Good, Nora replied. If those are archival documents or prior directives, they will matter. Do not remove them yourself. If you can locate them, photograph without touching. We need chain of custody. If we get the order, an officer goes with you. Understood, Emily said, meaning and also not meaning it. James slid a city map closer, his pen moving until roads and creeks formed a lattice. If we approach the house in daylight, they will see us coming from half a mile away, he said. But the boathouse has a service path. Your grandfather showed it to me once when we visited years ago. 2 bends, 1 deadfall. If the window seat hides originals, the study still hides copies. Charles is sentimental about his trophies. He will keep trophies of paper too. Emily closed her eyes and let the house unspool behind them, the piano with a chipped key, the framed newspaper from the year the company went public, the blue rug in the library that swallowed sound with the thick patience of old money. She could see the music room now, the north wall, the radiator chipping paint beneath the long window seat. When she was small, she had pressed her ear to that wood to listen for mice. She remembered once, a hollow note, the secret drum of space behind the panel. A box could sleep there. Derek, she said, opening her eyes, if we find the box, we need to move before they spin a new story. Can you line up someone who will print a declaration and notarize at odd hours? I have a friend with a printer he calls the Anvil, Derek said. He prints through the night and swears like a sailor. Consider it done. Marisol angled her laptop toward them again. One more thing. The device paired with a second phone the night before the party. That second phone belongs to a courier service out of Stamford. They advertise mobile notarization for high-net-worth clients. Their calendar shows a blocked slot on Tuesday at 1:30 in the afternoon labeled Private Lake. That is not a coincidence. Emily felt the shape of the plan harden until it took on the weight of something inevitable. They will bring the notary to the estate to capture a staged signature, she said. Witnesses will be hand-picked. The filing will be electronic by 2. If we do nothing, by dusk the deed is gone. James lifted his head. Then we have to treat tonight like our only night. Lila's audio landed in Nora's inbox at twilight. The first seconds were a scramble of cloth and distant footsteps, then a voice Emily did not recognize said, warm with condescension, just your little name. Margaret's reply was small but firm. Then a scrape of chair legs, a laugh, a low command to hold the pen that made Emily's jaw ache. The file ended with a door closing softly. Nora called back within minutes. This is gold, she said. And also gasoline. I am filing. They assembled a timeline on Derek's whiteboard, the caregiver's termination dates, the boutique firm's calls, the jamming device pairings, the party, the blocked notary slot for Tuesday, 1:30 in the afternoon. Emily added a thin line in pencil from window seat to lake parcel and drew a small square to mark the boathouse. She circled the word Tuesday and then drew an arrow backward to tonight. 2 teams, James said at last. Derek and Marisol continue pushing data to Nora. Keep the judge warm. Emily and I drive back. We stay off the main road after the last turn. We use the service path. We do not take anything unless the order lands, but we confirm the location. If we are seen, we are lost guests who came to return a scarf. We smile, and we leave. Act like nothing is wrong, Emily said, and the words rang differently now, less a plea, more a discipline. She folded the letter again, feeling its impression through the paper as though the words had been tattooed on her palm. And when the order lands? We call the officer who promised to return, James answered. We walk back in the front door. The drive to Woodridge felt shorter in the dark, the road drawing them the way the tide draws waiting feet. Past the last gas station, they killed their headlights for the final stretch, creeping along the narrow lane until the trees thickened into a tunnel. The lake breathed to their left, black and glossy, a sheet of ink. They parked beneath a stand of pines and stepped into the hush, their boots finding the faint path by memory and the thin beam of a covered flashlight. The service trail curled like a question mark around the boathouse. The water lapped softly against the dock, a metronome for nerves. Emily crouched beside a pile of old oars, leaned against the boathouse wall and ran her fingers along the rough wood. Behind them, at shoulder height, a panel with mismatched screws glinted back. James's breath tensed beside her. Later, he murmured. Window seat first. They moved along the house's stone skirt to the northern face. The music room's window was tall and divided into small panes that reflected their shadows as thin ghosts. A faint sliver of light bled from beneath the curtain. Emily pressed her palm to the glass and felt nothing but the cold. She pressed her ear to the wood beneath and heard, faint and improbable, the quiet hollowness she remembered from childhood. A space where sound died differently. James produced a tiny mirror on a telescoping handle and slid it between the sill and the cushion seam. He angled, adjusted, and then breathed the barest note of satisfaction. "There," he whispered. Two brass corners, edges dulled by time. A box, tucked behind a thin, painted panel. They did not pry. They did not even test the nails. Emily took 3 photos from 3 angles, each one time-stamped, each one wide enough to show context. Then she exhaled into the night, the breath rising in a white vow. Back at the car, they powered their phones. Messages bloomed. Derek, filing done. Nora, petition accepted, hearing set for the morning. Judge wants the officer present. Possible temporary order tonight if we can reach Chambers. 10 minutes later, another message, hold position. If an order issues, it will be narrow and immediate. Emily sat with the phone in both hands and watched the lake hold its darkness like a secret ceasing to be a secret. She could see the story now not as a series of shocks, but as a pattern, a choreography of pressure, restrict the phones, Leonie's legacy, stage a tribute as propaganda, soften the mind with routine and new pills, shepherd signatures under witnesses who would later swear that capacity was as good as any day. It was not a family argument. It was a machine, calibrated and oiled, grinding toward Tuesday. Her chest ached, and she let it. The ache meant she had not normalized any of it. The ache meant she remembered her grandmother's humming in the summer heat, the way Margaret would touch the back of Emily's hand when she was little and afraid of thunderstorms, murmuring, "I see the lightning, but I choose the steady light." Tonight, the steady light was the thin reflection in the window glass of a brass corner hidden where a song might have been stored. James put the car in gear, then paused. "When this breaks open," he said softly, "they will call you ungrateful. They will say you are destroying your own home." Emily looked at the house, at the tall windows and the dark curtains and the history arranged like furniture. "A home is not a shell," she said. "It is what survives when you tell the truth in it." The phone buzzed again. "Nora, order signed. Narrow scope. No transfer or execution of instruments, immediate preservation of originals, supervised entry to retrieve archival documents relevant to capacity and ownership, officer en route. Be ready." Emily closed her eyes for one long, bracing heartbeat. The pieces had finally clicked, the letter's ghostly imprint, the metadata's stubborn logic, the notary's discreet calendar block, the late-night patrols, the hollow under the window seat where an old man had once hidden something he knew would be needed by someone who had not yet grown into the shape of her courage. It was all one line now, not scattered dots. She opened her eyes. "Let's go back," she said. "And this time, we do not knock like guests." The return drive to the estate unfolded under a sky cut with veins of lightning, silent, distant flashes that painted the horizon in brief, broken strokes. As they approached the town limits, James called the precinct directly, speaking with quiet urgency. "This is James Carter. We spoke earlier regarding Margaret Whitmore and the emergency order signed tonight by Judge Carroll. The court has authorized supervised entry to secure and preserve potential legal documents relevant to a capacity investigation. We're on the property perimeter now. Are you sending an officer?" A pause. Then the voice on the other end shifted in tone, measured, slightly wary. "We've received the order. Officer Dillard is en route to your location now. Please remain visible and do not attempt to enter the residence until law enforcement arrives." James ended the call without responding. Emily sat beside him, phone resting in her lap, eyes fixed on the black outline of the house ahead. The estate looked different now, less like a home and more like a barricade. The porch lights were off. Curtains drawn. No music. No movement. "They're hiding something," Emily said. "Or preparing for it to end." Minutes later, a pair of headlights crested the road behind them. A police cruiser slowed and pulled up beside their car. Officer Dillard stepped out, a woman in her early 40s with steady posture and the brisk walk of someone who didn't waste time. She approached Emily's side of the car. "Emily Carter?" "Yes. I've reviewed the emergency order. I'm here to accompany you and verify the condition and location of the archival materials. The order restricts you from removing any objects yourself. You may photograph what's found. Any interference by household members becomes part of the official report. Understood?" "Understood," Emily said. James opened his door. "I'll go with her," he said. Officer Dillard looked at him. "You may stay close, but I'll do the talking. Let's go." They followed her up the curved gravel path, steps crisp over scattered leaves. At the door, Dillard knocked firmly, once, twice. No response. She waited. Knocked again, louder. Emily heard faint movement inside, shifting floorboards, then silence. Officer Dillard turned the knob. Unlocked. She pushed the door open. "Police. This is Officer Dillard with a court order signed by Judge Carroll. I am authorized to supervise the preservation of documents potentially related to estate coercion. Please step forward if you are inside." Still silence. Then Vanessa appeared from the hallway, barefoot, wrapped in a robe, mascara smudged as though she'd been crying, or preparing to. "What's going on?" she asked, voice brittle. Dillard handed her a copy of the order. "We'll be conducting a brief inspection of the music room on the north side of the house. Any interference will be noted. I'm calling our attorney." "You may do so," Dillard said. "But we're not waiting." Vanessa stepped aside reluctantly, watching as the trio moved through the foyer. Emily's heart pounded with every step. The smell of lemon polish clung to the air. The house was too quiet. They reached the music room. Dillard entered first. Emily followed, eyes locked on the window seat. It looked untouched. She approached slowly, noting the cushion's slight sag on the right side, the same corner from her childhood, the spot that had always dipped when she sat to listen to storms. She crouched beside it and gently lifted the cushion. The panel underneath bore faint scrapes near the edge, recent. Emily turned to the officer. "There's something behind here. We took photos earlier, externally. We didn't disturb it. The object is recessed behind a removable panel." "Proceed," Dillard said. James stepped forward with his phone ready. Emily pried her fingers along the seam of the panel and tugged gently. It came free with a soft crack. Inside, nestled between the inner wall supports, was a wooden box. Dark mahogany, engraved on the lid with the family crest, an older version, faded from years of friction. A metal clasp held it closed, but not locked. Dillard leaned closer. "Don't touch it." Emily nodded. "I'm not." James began taking photos from multiple angles, full view, close-ups, serial markings. Dillard radioed dispatch. "This is Officer Dillard. I've confirmed the presence of an archival container consistent with the emergency order parameters. It appears undisturbed. Photographic evidence is being collected now." The officer pulled out a small seal bag. "I'm authorizing transport to evidence intake. The box will be preserved until further instruction from Judge Carroll." As she called for an evidence vehicle, Emily rose to her feet slowly, head still spinning. "She was right," she said. "My grandmother. This is what they were trying to hide." Vanessa's voice rang from the hall. "You don't know what's in that box?" Dillard turned. "Ma'am, I recommend you remain silent until your attorney is present." "I'm not hiding," Vanessa said, stepping into the room now. "I'm trying to protect what's left of this family." Emily met her eyes. "By stealing it?" Vanessa laughed bitterly. "You think that deed matters? The lake parcel isn't even profitable unless it's rezoned. And rezoning takes years. You think Charles was doing this for the money?" Emily didn't blink. "He was doing it for control." The two women stared at each other across the piano bench, over the ghosts of their childhoods. Dillard interjected. "This is not the time." The officer's radio crackled, confirmation that the transport unit was en route. She turned to Emily and James. "You can remain here or return to your vehicle. But this room is sealed until the box is taken into custody." Emily looked around the space once more. The piano keys were dusty. A single sheet of music lay forgotten, half tucked beneath the lid. She turned and walked out. In the hallway, Margaret stood near the stair rail, hands trembling against the banister. Her eyes were wide, confused, but not blank. Emily walked to her. "We found it," she said softly. "They can't make you sign anything now." Margaret blinked slowly. "Did they lie?" "Yes." Margaret nodded, once. "Then let them leave," she said. Behind them, a soft thud announced the arrival of the transport unit. The men in gloves and uniforms carried the box with care. Emily didn't follow. She stayed with her grandmother, both of them watching the rain press against the glass, the storm swelling and receding beyond the trees. The truth had made it out. But justice still needed time. Margaret sat in the corner room beneath a blanket of early morning light, her body diminished by time but her eyes alert, watching Emily as if relearning her granddaughter's face. An officer remained outside the room, silent but present, part of the interim guardianship enforced until the court made further determinations. The house, once cloaked in curated quiet, now held a kind of charged stillness, less secrecy, more containment. Emily pulled up a chair beside the bed and held her grandmother's hand gently, feeling the thrum of a pulse still insistent beneath translucent skin. "They took the box to the courthouse," she said. "It's under seal, but it'll be reviewed with your medical report." Margaret gave a faint nod. "I hid it in 1997, she said, her voice as dry as old paper. "After your grandfather passed. Charles started asking questions about parcels and deeds, about what I would do if I became unable to manage things. His phrasing. So careful." Emily leaned in, brow furrowed. This was never just about a document. Margaret's lips twitched, an almost smile. "No. It was about erasure." Emily sat back slowly. "What did they want to erase?" Margaret looked past her, toward the window. "In 1974, I revoked the development rights on the South Lake parcel. Your grandfather was furious. He wanted to sell the rights, get out of the estate taxes. I refused. I filed the restriction in my name alone." "Why?" "Because Rachel drowned there," Margaret said, her voice soft and steel-edged at once. Emily blinked. "Rachel, my cousin? Your aunt?" Emily froze. "You weren't told," Margaret said. "I wondered if they would rewrite it. I thought Rachel died in a car crash. That's what they said." Margaret shook her head slowly. "She drowned in the lake. She was 13. Charles was 17. He was with her. They had sneaked out after midnight to swim. He left her. Came back to the house without her. Claimed he hadn't known she went in." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "There was an inquiry," Margaret continued. "But nothing stuck. My husband had influence. Your father was protected. But I knew. She had scratches on her neck, someone held her down. She was always stronger in the water. She was never careless. I told the coroner, but he called me emotional. A grieving mother." Emily's hands trembled. "They buried the truth," she whispered. "And they buried her by the cove," Margaret said. "That's why I preserved the land. No one was going to put condominiums over her." The air in the room thickened. Emily stood and walked to the window, her reflection faint in the morning light. "That's why they need her signature," James said from the doorway. He had entered quietly, standing now with arms crossed. "Because she's the only name on that conservation document. It can't be revoked by Charles alone. And the document predates their company formation," Emily added. "Which means it doesn't fall under their current corporate umbrella." Margaret exhaled. They waited for me to forget. That was the plan. Wait for my mind to loosen, then rework the past. Emily turned. But they didn't count on you remembering the one thing that mattered. Margaret looked at her. No. I remembered Rachel. Always. That evening, the judge held a closed-door hearing. Nora called from her car outside the courthouse, voice clipped but energized. They've ruled the documents found in the music room as admissible in the investigation. The notary appointment for Tuesday has been blocked by judicial injunction. Your grandmother will receive an independent capacity evaluation within 48 hours. Until then, all legal decisions on her behalf will be paused. Emily sat in the living room, the phone resting between her palms like a relic. The portrait above the fireplace, Margaret at age 40, painted in gold leaf tones, seemed less like a decoration now and more like an indictment. Every corner of the house was saturated with the weight of what had gone unsaid for decades. Vanessa did not come downstairs. Charles had been taken in for questioning earlier that afternoon. A quiet exit through the side door, 2 detectives and a plain car. Emily didn't ask what he had said. She didn't need to. Later that night, while Margaret rested under observation, Emily wandered the halls alone. The door to the study was cracked open. She stepped inside. The fire in the hearth had long gone cold. A half-empty glass of bourbon sat on the edge of the desk. Papers were scattered, but not the way someone desperate would scatter them. It was orderly chaos. Intentional misdirection. Emily moved to the locked drawer on the left side of the desk and reached into the potted fern nearby. Her fingers brushed against cold metal. The key. She unlocked the drawer and opened it slowly. Inside were 2 folders, each marked with Charles's handwriting, one labeled Asset Revisions, the other Whitmore Legacy, Forward Planning. She opened the first. Inside, printouts of deed maps, highlighted in yellow, correspondences with real estate consultants, a typed summary of proposed zoning changes for South Cove, and a line item labeled Reclamation via Long-Term Medical Reassignment. Emily's stomach turned. The second folder was thinner. A single sheet of lined paper with a handwritten note. Family is the name we give to permanence. Everything else, truth, loyalty, memory, is negotiable. When she's gone, I will rebuild this place the way it should have always been. Emily folded the paper slowly and slid it into her pocket. She returned everything else to the drawer, relocked it, and walked back into the hallway. At the top of the stairs, she stopped. Margaret's room was just ahead. James was sitting outside the door, half dozing, one hand resting near a closed book. She's still sleeping, he said softly. Emily nodded. Let her rest. She sat beside him on the floor, leaning back against the wall, the weight of silence finally beginning to lift. But not completely. She thought of Rachel, of a girl whose name had been turned into a whisper, whose grave had been treated as inconvenience. The cove still held her memory, and now, maybe, it would hold something more. Not a monument. Not a secret. But truth. And Emily knew that would have to be enough. For now. The sky over Woodridge was dull and colorless the morning the police returned. There had been no advance notice, no dramatic arrival, just 2 unmarked vehicles pulling silently into the gravel drive, engines cooling like exhausted breath. Officer Dillard stepped out of the first car, flanked this time by 2 detectives from the district's Special Investigations Unit. One carried a leather briefcase, the other, a small evidence satchel already marked for seizure. Inside the Whitmore house, the staff had been dismissed 2 days earlier. The help had gone quietly, like birds before a storm, leaving empty plates in the sink and linen napkins folded with more haste than care. Vanessa remained in her room. No one had seen her speak to her father since his quiet departure to the station. Margaret was under medical observation, now officially placed under protective supervision pending evaluation. Emily stood in the foyer when the door opened again. This time, no one knocked. Dillard greeted her with a nod. Ms. Carter. You're aware of the court's update? Emily had spent the night reading every line of the judge's addendum, new authorizations, expanded search parameters, and a limited but active consent from Margaret's legal guardian ad litem, effective immediately. "I am," she said. "The study and the cellar." Dillard's gaze sharpened. "You mentioned something yesterday. A phrase, long-term medical reassignment." "It wasn't a formal term." "It wasn't," Emily said. "It was a euphemism. But I found it in a folder in the desk drawer. Same one that held documents about South Cove and projected zoning changes. If you're looking for a deeper strategy, that's where it begins." The younger detective, Rios, flipped open a notepad. "We also received confirmation from the notary service. The appointment for Tuesday was not only blocked, it had been prepaid. By Charles Whitmore's holding account. Witnesses were prearranged. None of them knew Margaret personally." Dillard stepped forward. "Show us the study." Emily led them through the house. The air felt stagnant, the silence unnatural, like the walls were still waiting for the party that never resumed. In the study, she motioned to the desk drawer, then stepped back as the detective gloved up and began removing documents. Each page was photographed, catalogued, and placed in an evidence sleeve. Detective Heller found a ledger beneath the drawer false bottom, a slim, bound journal filled with tightly written columns of dates, names, and notations in shorthand. "What's this?" he asked. Emily peered over his shoulder. "That's not my father's handwriting." "It's too neat for Charles," James added from the door. "Maybe his assistant?" Heller flipped to the middle of the book. A line caught his eye. "April 3rd, double dose/quiet by 10:15/no resistance/file marked F." He pointed it out. "We'll need toxicology confirmation. If this refers to medication administered without medical oversight, we may be dealing with intentional cognitive suppression. That moves us into felony territory." "Criminal negligence," Dillard said. "Possibly elder endangerment," Rios added. They finished in the study within 20 minutes. Then came the cellar. Emily hesitated before unlocking the narrow door tucked behind the kitchen. She'd always hated this part of the house, too cold, too far beneath everything. She remembered childhood dares from cousins: go down and touch the coal bin, say Rachel's name 3 times. She'd always refused. Now, she led the way. The stairs creaked beneath their weight. The air was dry, with the faint scent of metal and mildew. Dust danced in the beam of Rios's flashlight. The cellar had been partially converted decades ago, part wine storage, part archive, but now the shelves held a different kind of collection. Metal filing cabinets, each unmarked. A wire rack with old VHS tapes. A locked freezer with no external label. "This doesn't belong to any estate inventory," Emily said quietly. Dillard nodded to Heller. "Open the top drawer." Inside were dozens of folders, each labeled with names that weren't Whitmore. Most were clipped with paper receipts, legal notes, and confidential agreements. Heller paused on one labeled L. Hargrove. "Caregiver," he said. "Terminated 6 months ago." Emily felt her chest tighten. "Open it." Inside was a signed non-disclosure agreement, 2 official warnings, and a 1-page behavioral report written in vague, corporate language. Heller flipped to the back. A photograph. Emily recognized the woman, Lila, standing in the same hallway where Emily had last seen her years ago. The note beneath the photo read simply, "Disruptive influence/scheduled exit." Rios opened the drawer beside it. More names. Each followed the same pattern: documentation, removal, silence. "This isn't record-keeping," Dillard said. "It's containment." Emily turned. "There's more," she said. "Behind the shelf." She pulled aside an old painting and pressed the release mechanism on the panel. The shelving unit creaked forward, revealing a narrow gap behind it, barely large enough for 2 people to stand. On the far wall, a corkboard was pinned with photos and maps. Some were aerial shots of the lake. Others were scans of old blueprints. In the center, circled in red marker, was the conservatory floor plan. One section was labeled subsurface vault/alternate file storage. Dillard swore under her breath. They were planning to relocate materials, Heller said, before a search could be ordered. Emily pointed at the corner of the board. There, in small writing, was a list. Finalize notary schedule. Administer adjustment by Sunday evening. Escort Margaret to Stamford Post signature. She turned to Dillard. They weren't going to keep her here. They were going to move her. Facility transfer without consent, Rio said. And if they got the signature before that, she'd lose standing to challenge anything. They spent another hour photographing everything. Emily stepped out for air, her chest tight, her fingers numb. The driveway now held a third vehicle, Nora's sedan. She approached quietly, holding a manila envelope. I came straight from Chambers, she said. The judge has agreed to fast-track review. We'll present our findings tomorrow morning. Based on what's recovered today, we may be able to secure a permanent protective order over Margaret's estate. She handed Emily the envelope. Inside, a transcript of the emergency hearing. Emily scanned the lines, stopping at the footnote. Testimony of prior coercion considered credible. Additional review pending. Temporary conservatorship of Margaret Whitmore assigned to Emily Carter until further evaluation. Emily looked up. I'm the conservator? Temporarily. You're the only family member not connected to the attempted fraud. And your actions were the catalyst for protection. James joined them at the base of the steps. We're close, he said. Too close for them not to try something else. Nora nodded. That's why the judge added a clause. You have discretion to lock the house if needed. No further legal instruments can be enacted here unless approved by the court. Emily looked at the house again. The doors that had once concealed generations of control. The silence that had allowed it. And now, the sound of locks clicking into place, not to keep her in, but to keep history from being erased again. There was still more to uncover. But the silence had finally been broken. And this time, it would not return. By the time the early hearing was scheduled in Hartford the next morning, a quiet ripple had begun to pass through the legal community in Connecticut. Though still confined to sealed records, word spread that something was unraveling within the Whitmore estate, something involving guardianship, coercion, and a well-known regional family with significant real estate holdings. Emily, seated in the courthouse hallway beside her attorney, Nora Patel, kept her eyes on the floor tiles. The marble under her feet gleamed with old polish, but there was a crack running diagonally from the baseboard to her shoe. It reminded her of something structural breaking beneath surface perfection. Inside the courtroom, a judge she had never met, Justice Irene Halsley, read silently through the supplemental documentation from the police search. Officer Dillard's full report had been entered the night before. The photos from the study, the ledgers, the concealed files, and the conservatory floor plan notes were compiled in a series of thick binders now resting on the bench. The judge's clerks had added additional information just an hour earlier, financial records showing pre-authorized disbursements timed suspiciously close to the now-blocked Tuesday notary appointment, and an intercepted email from Charles to a private medical consultant referencing non-litigious final adjustments for a transfer of care. The courtroom had no gallery that morning, closed hearing. But Charles was present, seated beside his lawyer, a silver-haired man with a dry voice and an expensive briefcase. Vanessa, notably, had not appeared. Her absence spoke louder than anything she might have said. Margaret was represented by a court-appointed advocate, though she remained in observation at the hospital. The advocate had submitted a short but striking statement, based in part on new interactions with her the day prior. She was lucid, engaged, and, according to the physician's evaluation, exhibiting no current signs of cognitive decline severe enough to warrant permanent guardianship. Emily was called forward last. When she stood, the weight of the past week threatened to anchor her legs, but her voice did not shake. I believe my grandmother was isolated and medicated beyond what was necessary for her actual health, she began. I believe her son and granddaughter coordinated to assume full legal control of her estate, including the South Cove parcel, with the intent of reversing conservation restrictions that had been in place for nearly 50 years. She paused. There is documentation showing that they prepared the transfer in secrecy, arranged a notary and witnesses, and planned to move her into long-term care immediately after, effectively removing her from her own home while presenting it publicly as a voluntary decision. Justice Halsey regarded her without expression. "And what made you intervene when you did, Ms. Carter?" Emily breathed in, then answered. She asked for help. The room held the stillness of a truth that needed no embellishment. The judge called a recess to review remaining documentation and reconvened within the hour. When she returned to the bench, her ruling was deliberate, composed, and every word cut through the years of silence like a blade. The court finds that there is credible evidence of deliberate coercion, concealed actions with financial intent, and a failure to report potential abuse by individuals who held power over the vulnerable party. Effective immediately, Charles Whitmore's legal authority over Margaret Whitmore's estate is revoked. All documents executed on or after August 1 are suspended pending forensic review. She turned to Emily. "Ms. Carter, the court recognizes your actions as materially significant to this investigation. You are appointed interim estate trustee pending a formal reassignment process. You will collaborate with court officers and an independent elder care ombudsman to ensure full compliance." Her gavel struck once, echoing through the room. It was over. No outburst followed. Charles remained seated, his lawyer whispering to him with clipped restraint. Emily did not look at him as she exited the courtroom. She didn't need to. The space between them was now filled with something irreversible. Outside, the courthouse steps were damp from a passing rain, but the sky had cleared. James was waiting by the railing. He had watched the entire proceeding through the security feed inside a nearby conference room, his presence unofficial but unwavering. As soon as she reached him, Emily sank onto the stone bench nearby. "It's done," she said. "Not done," James replied gently. "But shifted." They sat in silence. Nora approached moments later, holding a manila envelope and an exhausted expression. "The ombudsman has already scheduled a site visit," she said. "You'll have oversight, but also backing. They're impressed, Emily." The judge didn't say it outright, but she read between every line. "She sees the full picture." Emily nodded. "What about Vanessa?" "She'll be served," Nora replied. "Her absence today only confirms what we needed. There's an active ethics complaint going through the state bar. She co-authored documents on behalf of your grandmother while managing her medications. That alone is enough." They returned to the estate that afternoon with a new key in hand, one issued by the court. Officer Dillard met them at the gate. The house was no longer under surveillance, but it wasn't quite free either. It was now considered a potential site of civil litigation. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The light seemed too bright. The furniture too carefully arranged, as if trying to reclaim innocence. Margaret had been discharged into a transitional care suite in Hartford for monitoring, but her room remained untouched. Emily entered it alone. She opened the armoire first, checking the inside panels for signs of tampering. None. Then the drawers. Margaret's handwriting was still visible on old receipts, notes to herself written in shaky but legible script. One card had Emily's name written at the top. Under it, just 4 words. "You saw it coming." Emily sat on the edge of the bed, the card in her hand. For the first time in days, her body relaxed. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Later, James returned from the cellar, holding one final envelope. This was wedged behind the furnace. Officer Rios must have missed it. Inside, a black and white photograph, heavily faded. 2 girls in swimsuits standing beside the lake. One was unmistakably Rachel. The other looked so much like Emily at that age it gave her pause, until she realized it wasn't her. It was Margaret, maybe 10 or 11, beside her sister. A note was scribbled on the back in Margaret's adult handwriting. "We protect them not because they are perfect, but because we remember when they had no voice." That night, Emily sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of her and began writing the statement she would submit to the ombudsman, to the board that would oversee the permanent reassignment of estate trusteeship, and, one day, to her grandmother. She would not tell them about revenge. She would tell them about Rachel. And about how truth, once buried, still reaches for air. 3 weeks after the court's ruling, the Whitmore estate no longer hummed with hushed commands or orchestrated silence. The air was cleaner, almost hollow. The staff that once tiptoed through routines now worked with transparency under the oversight of the newly appointed elder care liaison. Margaret, having returned home under strict medical observation, occupied the east sunroom again, where the morning light came through clear glass, no longer filtered by drawn curtains or veiled intentions. Emily arrived every morning at 8 o'clock sharp. No longer a visitor, she held the authority of the court and the awareness of someone who had fought for a voice long denied. She brought no airs, no entitlement, just her presence, her watchful eyes, and her quiet commitment to repair what could be salvaged from the wreckage. Charles had yet to return to the estate. His attorney had requested a formal leave of absence from all family-owned business operations, citing emotional duress and reputational strain. The press had caught wind of the investigation, but so far, most outlets remained vague, too cautious to print allegations not yet fully substantiated. Emily knew that would change once the forensic audit of the South Cove parcel was completed and the transcripts from the family court hearings were unsealed. Vanessa had filed a petition to challenge the disciplinary complaint against her, but the evidence submitted by Nora's team was damning. The bar's ethics board had already suspended her pending further review, and a quiet but significant number of her former clients were now seeking independent audits of their documents. She had not contacted Emily. Not once. And that, in its way, was the sharpest confirmation of guilt. On a cold Thursday morning, James joined Emily in the music room. The house was quieter than usual, as the ombudsman was meeting off-site with state social services to provide a full report on Margaret's recovery. "She asked for you," James said, standing near the window. "Said she wanted to go down to the lake again." Emily blinked. "Did she say why?" He shook his head. "Just said it was time." They brought Margaret down slowly, Emily supporting her grandmother's arm while James led the way along the winding trail. The walk was longer than it once had been. Weeds had crept up the path's edge, and tree roots had begun to distort the slope near the final descent to the cove. But the bench Margaret had favored still stood there, slightly weathered but intact, facing the wide water and the hidden history beneath its surface. When they reached it, Margaret sat carefully. Emily settled beside her. Neither spoke for several minutes. The lake was silent. No wind. No birds. Only the small lap of water against the stone shoreline. "She was trying to run away," Margaret said finally. "That night." Emily turned. "Rachel? She'd told me 2 weeks earlier she didn't want to stay here anymore. Said the house felt wrong. She'd found something. A letter between your grandfather and a buyer. I still don't know what it said, but she was scared. Said they were planning to sell something they had no right to." Emily felt the weight of the words settle into her spine. "She was 13, Margaret continued. And Charles, he was 17, but already too sure of himself. He thought he could handle everything. That nothing would follow him. He didn't push her. I know that. But he didn't stop her either. And when she went under, he let the water hold her." Emily looked away, blinking fast. "I buried that truth to keep the family from imploding," Margaret said. "But when you bury truth, you feed it. And it grows sideways." Emily breathed out. "I don't know if I can forgive them." "You don't need to," Margaret said. "You just need to keep them from doing it again." Later that day, Nora called from Hartford with an update. The investigation had been expanded to include prior property transfers Charles had executed on behalf of other family members, many of which now appeared to include forged consents or manipulated documents. Investigators had located a second phone linked to the private medical consultant referenced in the ledger. That phone contained recordings, audio of Charles discussing strategies to accelerate Margaret's decline in legal fitness. "They're calling it premeditated medical coercion," Nora said. "If it goes to court, it could trigger criminal charges." Emily stared at the receiver in her hand. "What are her chances of testifying if it does?" Nora hesitated. "It depends on her stamina. Her lucidity is intact, but it may be too much." Emily nodded, even though Nora couldn't see her. "Then I'll speak for her." The audit of the South Cove parcel concluded a week later. The original conservation order, filed under Margaret's name in 1974, had been confirmed as legally binding and still in effect. Charles's attempt to undo it with new documentation, prepared through Vanessa's firm, had failed to meet statutory requirements. The Department of Environmental Protection issued a formal injunction protecting the land from any structural or commercial development in perpetuity, unless overruled by federal authority. The cove was safe. But the family was forever changed. On the first Sunday of the month, Emily gathered the staff in the front parlor. She stood in front of the fireplace and read from a new handbook, one she'd written herself, built from conversations with the ombudsman, legal counsel, and, more quietly, with Margaret. "This house will remain operational under a transparency-first policy. No medication changes will occur without double verification. No estate decisions will be made behind closed doors. Every action from here forward must meet one standard, that it can be spoken aloud without shame or omission." No one objected. Most of them nodded. Some even smiled. Afterward, she found James in the conservatory, sipping black coffee and staring through the rain-streaked glass. "You think it's enough?" she asked. "I think it's a start." Emily sat beside him. "There's a part of me that still waits for a knock at the door. For someone to say it was all a misunderstanding." James didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a folded photograph. It was the image of Margaret and her sister as children, the one recovered from behind the furnace. He handed it to her. Emily turned it over. The same inscription. "We protect them not because they are perfect, but because we remember when they had no voice." She held it tightly. Not all stories ended in resolution. But this one had consequences. And in those consequences, maybe, just maybe, there was a kind of justice. Winter had started to creep into the edges of Connecticut by the time the final report from the state's Elder Protection Office arrived. Emily opened the sealed envelope in the same sunroom where Margaret now spent her afternoons, surrounded by wool blankets and soft classical music. The report was definitive and unambiguous, confirmation of coercive attempts, medication misuse, and planned fraudulent transfer of property rights. It contained recommendations for full restitution of control to Margaret Whitmore, pending her sustained cognitive stability, and an extension of Emily's guardianship as a precautionary measure for no less than 6 months. Emily placed the pages on the side table beside her grandmother, who looked over the first line and gave a dry, tired laugh. "Well," Margaret said, "it's not justice, but it's at least a verdict." The legal consequences for Charles were still developing. A civil suit had already been filed against him by the state, with criminal charges still under review, particularly in light of the recordings uncovered by Nora's team. Vanessa had been formally disbarred the previous week, with her appeal rejected on grounds of egregious misconduct and conflict of interest. Her firm had dissolved within days. Emily hadn't spoken to her since the initial hearing, though she had received a terse letter in the mail, 3 sentences long, unsigned, with no return address. She didn't need to open it. Some things were clear even without being said. In the days that followed the report's release, Emily found herself doing something she never expected: cleaning. Not for the court, not for optics, but for herself. She cleared the dust from the neglected guest rooms, threw away decades-old linens, opened the upstairs shutters that hadn't been unlatched in years. With the legal fog lifted, the house finally felt like a home again, albeit one trying to remember how. Margaret's health had improved steadily. Under new medical supervision, her medication had been reduced and properly managed. Her daily confusion had nearly vanished, replaced by brief lapses and longer stretches of quiet but sharp clarity. On some mornings, she asked about Rachel. On others, she simply stared out the window and said nothing for hours. Emily didn't push. She was learning that not every silence needed to be broken. James began working remotely from one of the upstairs rooms they had converted into an office. The move to Connecticut, initially meant as a brief visit, had taken on the quality of permanence. Neither of them had said it out loud, but they both felt it. This wasn't temporary anymore. The house needed them. Margaret needed them. And more than either had realized, they needed this place. On a snow-dusted morning in December, Emily sat at the kitchen table with a stack of documents before her, not legal briefs or court filings, but Margaret's original estate plans. Handwritten in ink on thick, cream-colored paper, they outlined the future of the property with clarity and intention. The South Cove was to remain protected, untouched, wild. The northern orchard, long abandoned, was meant to be revitalized into a public garden. There were sketches too, drawings of pathways, benches, archways filled with ivy. Margaret's vision had been vivid, even if no one had bothered to ask her about it in decades. Emily traced the lines of one of the sketches with her finger. It wasn't just land. It was memory. It was promise. She stood up and crossed the hall to the music room. The piano still bore the scratch marks from years of use and neglect. She sat and pressed a single key. The sound came out soft and imperfect. Still, it held. She began to play. Just a lullaby, one her grandmother used to hum. The notes were slow, hesitant at first, then smoother. The sound filled the air, echoing down the hallway where Margaret listened from her chair. Neither said anything. They didn't need to. That afternoon, Emily met with a local historical society representative who had been invited to tour the property. A woman in her 50s, neatly dressed, with a deep appreciation for legacy, she had reviewed the estate files and conservation plans with visible interest. "There's more than just value here," the woman said as they walked the perimeter of the cove. "There's intention. This is a cultural landmark disguised as family land. We'd like to help make it official." Emily nodded, feeling a calm settle in her. "You can have access to the blueprints," she said. Margaret saved everything. Over the next few weeks, conversations expanded: nonprofit partnerships, zoning protections, grant funding. The house, once a prison of history, was beginning to turn outward. A month later, Emily held a small gathering in the main hall. Just 12 people, neighbors, community members, a few staff, Nora, and Lila, the former caregiver who had returned as a friend, not employee. The fireplace was lit. Music played softly on a restored record player. Margaret sat near the hearth, not as a symbol, but as a person surrounded by those who had refused to let her be forgotten. Emily stood and raised a glass, not with the grandeur of Charles's old toasts, but with quiet resolve. "This house has been many things to many people," she said. "Some good, some hard to speak about. But what it becomes next is up to us. Not just me. All of us." She didn't say, family. That word had changed. But so had everything else. The gathering ended early. Emily walked Lila to her car in the cold, and the two women stood quietly beneath the porch light. "You stayed," Lila said, wrapping her scarf tighter. "I couldn't leave," Emily replied. Lila nodded. "That's what it means to remember." Back inside, Emily found James upstairs, filing away documents in the new office. "There's more work to do," he said without turning around. "There always will be," she replied, stepping beside him. He closed the drawer and looked at her. "But it doesn't have to hurt anymore." Emily reached for the photo they had placed on the desk, a framed copy of Rachel and Margaret as children, beside the lake. "We'll plant a tree at the cove in spring," she said. "For both of them." He nodded. In the days that followed, the house was quieter. Margaret began sleeping longer. Emily continued her routine: papers, calls, walks by the water. And one morning, she stepped into the sunroom and found her grandmother already awake, looking out the window. Without turning, Margaret spoke. "Tell me what it looks like." Emily smiled. Clear. Cold. Still. The lake's frozen over. The trees are bare. Margaret nodded slowly. But nothing's buried anymore. Emily sat beside her and took her hand. No, she said. Nothing is. Outside, the wind moved through the branches, shaking loose the last remnants of the past. And inside, something entirely new had begun.